Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to some. It's still morning where I am. Welcome to this latest episode of or webinar episode for Brandon Hall Group, Leading Through Disruption Without Burning Out Your Leaders. And that's the key there. How do we get through disruption without the burnout? Because disruption is all around us. We even had our own little instance of disruption this morning, but we're getting through it and we're not burned out. So that's a good thing. So I am Dr. Marline C. Duroseau. I'm the Managing Director at Brandon Hall Group of HR and Leadership Development. And I'm really, really excited that you guys have logged on and joined me today. Thank you so much. All right, so a little bit about Brandon Hall. Our vision is to inspire a better workplace experience, and our mission is to empower excellence in organizations around the world through the Brandon Hall research and the tools each and every day. And definitely some ways that you can participate and join in with Brandon Hall includes our Excellence Awards. Okay, we have the details for the submissions and things of that nature right on the screen. And the Excellence Awards are what sets us apart. So definitely take advantage if you know that you can contribute to the great class act data that we have by participating in the Excellence Awards. You can join our events. We have the Human Capital Management Excellence Conference in January 2027. And that may seem like it's a long time away, but before you know it, it'll be here. And we have events at our BRIC location, the AI and HR Summit, which is being held October of this year, and also the Leadership Summit, which will be held in November of this year. Additionally, you can collaborate with us as being a part of our Brandon Hall Group Institute, where you're able to elevate your expertise, transform your career, and impact your organization. All right, so after going through that, we have our first poll. And in addition to the poll, while you're answering it, definitely tell us where you're joining us from. We'd love to hear that. So for poll question one, what would you like to learn more about? Is it the awards program, the Institute, the Excellence Conference, the AI and HR Summit, or the Leadership Summit? Excited to hear what you think and what you're interested in. All right. Okay, thank you so much for that. And as we go on, I'd just like to remind you, we'd like to know what you're thinking. Definitely participate in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from. Hi, yes, from sunny, hot, and dry Northern Colorado. Yes, thank you so very much, Penny, for joining us out here all the way in Colorado. That's amazing. Definitely take advantage of the chat, ask any questions that you have, and feel free to share your comments as well. The chat box is open. And before we begin, I just wanted to share with everyone to let you know that I am joining you live today from the Transform HR event here in Las Vegas. So I'm on Pacific time this time instead of Eastern Standard Time. So being in this particular environment at the Transform HR conference, we are surrounded, of course, by all things HR, talent, transformation, just meeting so many different leaders. And that's what makes this topic specifically and especially timely today. Disruption isn't something that organizations are necessarily preparing for anymore because disruption, let's face it, is the actual way that it's the environment that we operate in every day. There's all types of disruption and somehow we just can't seem to escape it. And the reality is that, being involved in constant disruption is just forcing us to rethink how we can support leadership performance without exhausting the people that we rely on. And because of the disruption, and it's also a little bit of change management, we're all expected to just kind of jump on that bandwagon, ride it, and fix it. But then sometimes that leads to burnout. So the people that you are trusting the most are getting burnt out because of the disruption. So how do we support leadership and the performance of our leaders without exhausting them? Okay, so disruption is no longer episodic. episodic, right? Like we just mentioned, it's no longer just a phase. It's just the operating environment that we are functioning in. But so many organizations, they still treat the leader burnout as like an individual issue, right? How many times if you're a leader yourself, an employee or someone comes into your office and they may explain to you what they're dealing with. And if anything, you're thinking, okay, well, this is a specific issue for that particular person, and they're having a issue with their own burnout. But that's not what's happening anymore. This is something that we need to fix, right? With coaching, time off, incorporating wellness tools, rather than, recognizing it as just a specific individual issue. We need to look at disruption as a systemic business risk. Your business indeed will be at risk if we don't, address and support our leaders through disruption. So today we'll explore what disruption is really doing to our leaders, okay, why resilience now has evolved, okay, into the tool that we need to be able to handle, business capability, and how our organizations can design leadership systems that sustain performance without leading to burnout. So based on our Brandon Hall research, we show that leaders are navigating simultaneous disruption across technology, workforce expectations, and the change in business models, right? So again, disruption is layered, okay? They're no longer allotting any time to get through one disruption before we go into another, right? The leaders, we don't have any recovery time between disruptions. Everything is being stacked, okay? So a lot of the times when you think of disruption in the workplace, because of that cumulative load of the disruption, this is what we have to look at to say, okay, it looks like this is something that's constant. It looked like this is something that is ongoing. So what do we do because of all that layering to figure out a way to help our leaders, okay? And burnout in that case is not a business risk. I'm sorry, burnout is not a personal issue, like I mentioned before. Burnout then becomes a business risk, okay? So leader burnout shows up as friction in the business, because if your leader is expected to handle particular business outcomes or handle a particular segment in your business, however, they're burned out, that puts your business overall at risk. And if your business is at risk, that means they're unable to lead effectively, which means your teams are impacted, which then means productivity is, probably impacted, which then means team morale is impacted. So all of this trickles down to our employees, which then ultimately impacts our clients, right? And that ultimately impacts the business outcomes. So when leaders burn out, the impact is not just confined to the individual. Leader burnout shows up as they're not able to make swift and effective decisions. So their decision-making capability becomes slower, okay? They have aversions to risk, okay? There's reduced innovation. How are you able to think about another way or think outside of the box or incorporate different feedback if you're burned out? That means your ability to be creative and innovative, it's reduced as well. And oftentimes leadership attrition, okay, happens at the wrong times because of this burnout and it being systemic. Those critical roles in leadership, they experience higher attrition as a result of that. So from a CFO lens and a board perspective, burnout is not just a wellness issue. It puts your leaders' performance and overall business performance at risk. Okay, so what HR often underestimates about the load of leadership? And if we take a step back and think about it, the leadership load has indeed expanded. And it's expanded in a way that's very silent or invisible, because leadership now is encompassing so many different aspects of the business and the day-to-day operation. But yet when you look at a leader or when you look at your employee, a lot of times you only see what it is that you've tasked them with. However, they're still being expected to lead, right, and perform well as a leader, okay, in these often invisible situations that they find themselves in. So leadership today carries three simultaneous loads, okay? Three. There's the cognitive load, and that cognitive load involves them having to make constant decisions, right? Because of the disruption and because of all the change that is what ongoing, right? That causes the cognition of them to be just about to overflow. So it causes complexity and ambiguity. All right, we're not able to hone in on certain things because you're constantly shifting and changing. The other thing that happens is the emotional load. So being able to support your teams through uncertainty, because when all of this is going on, at the end of the day, we're human. So some of the disruption and the change that we're experiencing, it does take a toll on you emotionally. So that's also another layer of leadership that is often invisible, the emotional layer. And ultimately, you have the operational load that the leadership folks are tasked with as well. So a lot of the times when it comes to managing change, managing disruption, a lot of leaders aren't really equipped with the resources or the tools that they need in order to do so. And to be fair, oftentimes when the disruption happens, you don't know, so you can't really prepare for it. So now you have leaders that are doing more with fewer resources. Okay. And most leadership systems, they weren't designed for this level of, being able to sustain this type of constantly changing demand. Okay. All right. That takes us into our next polling question. How would you describe the level of disruption, right, leaders in your organization are currently navigating? Occasional but manageable, frequent and demanding, constant and intense, or unsure? And one of the things that I know that's disrupting or causing disruption in many organizations now, centers around AI. So that's definitely something that a lot of leaders and corporations are having to navigate, this inception or implementation of AI, just as an example. All right, yes, so that is kind of sort of what we've been seeing too. Frequent and demanding. 46% of you explain that your leaders are currently navigating disruption frequently and it's demanding. Thank you so much for that. So in navigating this disruption in the leadership role, okay, that now brings us to one of my favorite things, which the more I dig into it, I start to understand that resilience is something that is built. And now we talk about resilience so many times in so many different ways, but how do we, incorporate that in our ability to lead our teams? Okay. And definitely share in the chat, what your experience has been around disruption, the type of disruption you're experiencing, and what type of resilience is being built out of that. So why has resilience evolved into a business capability? So being resilient is no longer a trait. It's a system outcome. And resilient leaders aren't, they're not necessarily tougher, they're just better supported. Because once we look at resilience as something that it's not just a trait, right? Because everything is happening so fast and changing so fast, you build that resilience too as a result of what's happening. So once that resilience is built, in order to sustain and keep going, you need that support. Hence why we're having this webinar. How can organizations better support their leaders through all this disruption, which is also helping them build resistance, because why? We don't want them to burn out. So the HR Outlook 2026 from Brandon Hall, it emphasizes that resilience is a critical capability for sustaining performance, okay, under continuous change, right? And oftentimes we talk about resilience as something that leaders have, something that they're just born with. But when you're talking about high performing organizations or high performing professionals, resilience is something that the system produces. Right? You build that resilience, you produce that resilience as a result of going through over and over that continuous change that we see is coming up now in our daily lives. And that's embedded in decision rights, okay? Work design. How do we redesign the work to incorporate the support that's needed so that leaders aren't burnt out as a result of the disruption? Leadership expectations. Once you're building that resilience because you're constantly having to change, once the right support comes in, okay, what now is expected of the leader? Because if it's not talked about, if it's ignored, if it's not addressed, remember what I mentioned earlier in the webinar, you just look at it as you're a leader and you've tasked your team, or you yourself as a leader has been tasked to do something specific. And if it's not addressed for us to incorporate the disruption, then that's what you're seen as. Okay, so Dr. Mars is responsible for XYZ, check, that's it. No one's looking at all the other invisible things. So what the leadership expectations are is built on whether or not someone is properly supported. And ultimately, it's embedded in support structures, okay, which is everything I've been talking about when it comes to this slide. So resilient leaders are not tougher, they're just better supported. And that's that key word, because it's important to support our leaders as well. I saw something come in through the chat. Penny says, we're a nonprofit who went from having federal government funding to now having to rely on states to use their budget to purchase our support. You see? So resilience has been critical, in all caps. Thank you, Penny, for that, for that emphasis, to people leaders as their goals and activities are changing significantly. That is a phenomenal example. Okay, because on top of everything else, funding is something that, of course, is, very necessary and instrumental to the success of the business and to the success of the people that you're trying to help, right, in your organization. So being resilient and having to be able to go through that is extremely, extremely critical, as Penny has pointed out. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right. So with that, adding on to Penny's share there, poll question number 3, how is leader resilience primarily addressed in your organization today? How is your organization addressing leader resilience? Is it through individual coaching or wellness resources, training programs or workshops, informal support from peers or managers, or is leader resilience embedded already into your leadership system and processes? I'd love to see the results on that. That's fantastic. Okay, individual coaching or wellness resources. And then the next one is informal support from peers or managers. I think that these two things work hand in hand, because what's happening is with the individual coaching or wellness resources, because of the constant change, many organizations have found the need and have implemented more wellness resources to support their teams as a whole. So it's great to see that that's what's being experienced here. And of course, the informal support for peers, right, and the managers, or from them, to and for them. And the reason why I wanted to sit here for a quick minute is with the research that I did for my doctoral research that is centered around disruption as well, I did find that many of the participants in the real world, women in leadership, did, tend to rely on or have that support informally from the peers and the managers that they can trust. So I'm very, very happy to see that that is, second on the list here. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. Okay, now, what are the costs of treating burnout as an individual failure? Remember we said that it's a systemic thing for business, not just a personal issue. So when systems stay broken, people are who pay the price, right? That doesn't mean that there's a resilience gap. It's a design gap, right? So when organizations frame burnout as the shortcoming from a particular individual, there are 3 things that can happen, okay? Leaders turn to internalize their failure. And at that point, they're not seeking the support, maybe informally, of that peer or manager, because they're internalizing it. They're thinking it's specific to them. So if they talk about it or bring up that particular issue, they may be looked at as a failure, or, what if I discuss it and now they remember that and I don't get the promotion, or I don't get the increase, or they think it's going to impact my performance, right? So leaders turn to internalize failure if companies treat it as an individual thing. And another thing that happens is HR applies the solutions too late, right? That's one of the worst things that we like to hear. If only, or how come you didn't? And the ending of those two, statements normally end in come earlier, let me know, 2 months ago, last month, last year. And what's unfortunate about that is that we can't go back, right? So if we meaning leaders or companies, treat burnout as an individual failure and no one talks about it because no one feels safe, no one feels that they'll be supported in bringing it up, HR then is not aware, the company is not aware. So any solutions that they would want to implement, they're applied too late, right? We've already paid the cost, which may be through, non-performance, reduced performance, significantly ineffective decision-making, or even attrition with people leaving. The other thing that happens is performance erosion continues unnoticed because you're taking this on all by yourself and no one notices what's going on, right? So it's not a resilience gap, it's a design gap. Okay, so what sustainable leadership systems do differently? Okay, what do the leadership systems that are built for sustainability, what do they do differently? They design for endurance. That's the key, being able to endure, building that resilience as you endure, building that resilience and endurance as you deal with the constant change, right? That disruption is all around us. We saw a few slides earlier that it compounds. It's always ongoing. So they're designed for endurance and not heroics. So Brandon Hall award-winning practice. We have award-winning organizations, and what they do is they embed resilience into their leadership design, and they don't treat it as an add-on, okay? It's embedded into the design of their leadership programs. So sustainable organizations, what they do is they normalize recovery and not overextension. So even though the change and the disruption is constantly happening, and I always like to go back to COVID from one day to the next. I mean, we didn't know what we were going to get. And that's all of us almost, right? In every state and everywhere. So when we thought we got over one part of the issue, something else came up. So that was a great example of the continuous disruption and the continuous change that was being required as a result of that constant disruption. So because of that, it's like, okay, we fixed one thing or seemingly think we got it under control. So now we just have to go on to the next thing. No, these award-winning organizations, whether it means you staff more, whether it means you get the additional support, you allow, or they've allowed their teams to recover under all of this stress, right? So they normalize recovery and not overextension. Okay. Another thing that award-winning organizations proven to do is they clarify their decision authority. And that makes a big, big difference. Okay. Who's making the decision? Who are we going out to? Who does the onus fall on, right? And sometimes, even though there's a who, it doesn't have to be done individually or just solely for that person. They have a team around them that's built to help them make sure that they are clear when it comes to the type of decisions that are being made. Another thing that award-winning organizations do is they reduce unnecessary complexity. How many times have we dealt with that? There's a situation that presents itself, and sometimes the answer is right in front of us, but because we've never dealt with it before, right? Or we're not even recovered from the previous disruption and we have to go on, we tend to make things more complex that they need to, right? And that ultimately leads to burnout as well. And finally, award-winning organizations, they build leadership depth instead of dependency. That's a big one, right? They don't just rely on heroic leaders. They design systems that sustain the leaders. And designing a system that sustains the leaders oftentimes ultimately just means they have the right support, okay? Having that support just changes so many things and make a significant difference. So some metrics that signal leadership strain early. So remember a few slides ago, we talked about, HR implementing challenge strategies or solutions too late, right? So how do we avoid that? How do we mitigate that? So we first need to identify what's causing the burnout. What causes us to be at risk, right? So some leading indicators of burnout risk, okay, include, and this is anchored from the highlights of the HR Outlook 2026 presented by Brandon Hall Group. And leading indicators of burnout risk include decision delays. All of a sudden, we're not making those decisions timely. The role overload. Now, it's funny that we talk about the role overload when sometimes, because change and disruption is internalized, externally, people can't see the overload in the role, right? So once you take a step back, you meaning organizations, and see, hey, what's really going on in this leadership role, right? Because maybe the decision delays are as a result of that particular leader being overloaded in their role, right? The next thing that leads that indication of burnout is span of control creep, right? Then you have attrition in high impact roles, which is not good. We all know the cost of losing, high impact and high efficient roles for organizations. And then ultimately, a leading indicator of burnout risk is engagement volatility and leader-led teams. No one wants to engage. It's one day we're on, one day we're off, one day we're performing, next day not so much. So that kind of, signifies that something is going on. So by the time that leaders say that they're burned out, the damage is already done. So that's why as executives, we need early signals, okay, of what's happening, not exit interviews. Okay. All right. So we have HR's role. What is HR's role in designing that sustainable leadership that we talked about? Once we identify the indicating risk factors for burnout, how do we design a sustainable leadership program, right? So in that particular cases, this is where HR is strategic in their role, and you being strategic in your role becomes essential. Okay, so you don't want to be a responder to burnout, but you want to be the person that designs. You're already ahead of it. You've already embedded it into the leadership program or the leadership design of your organization. Okay, so that means that you're redesigning leadership expectations by taking into account that potential to build resilience, taking into account the continuous change that's happening. Okay, you're able to align performance with capacity. Right. And remember, one of the things we talked about is that oftentimes organizations do look at burnout as an individual thing, but it's not bad to look at it like that. But when you design your leadership program around being able to identify if a particular leader is burned out, then you're saying, okay, I noticed that, at the end of the quarter, when we're trying to meet quotas or when we're trying to make sure that all of the reporting is done, that means I have to go in and realign the role and reassign tasks or provide different timelines or deadlines because that particular leader can only perform at X capacity, right? But you have to know that in order to design it that way. That way the leader is not feeling overexerted and overworked because no one is caring about everything else that's going on, right? That they're dealing with. Okay. And another way to design leadership, sustainable leadership, is partnering with finance and operations, okay, to manage the load. So this is you architecting sustainability. Again, it goes back to design. It goes back to support. Design it in a manner where, in this case, for my example, we're going to partner with finance and operations, whether it is to meet that sales deadline, whether it is to meet that reporting deadline. We may have things that we have to get submitted. We don't have to really focus on getting it all done yourself, right? Depending on other people. And it make it be a good thing, not necessarily, oh no, they couldn't get it done and they have to get help. That's okay. It's all right. All right. So this is where HR's strategic role becomes essential for the organization. Okay. And this is what we talked about, designing it to go from insight to endurance, about protecting both your leaders and the results. And what are your results? Business outcome. What's business outcome? Client satisfaction. How do you get client satisfaction? Employee satisfaction, right? So you're going from insight to endurance. All right. So one of the things we talked about as it related to constant change and disruption, and it revolves around AI. So we have a poll here as a survey to find out, which phase does your organization most likely match for human resources as it relates to the inception of AI, right? The progress with that. So we have phase one, meaning your organization operates in crisis mode with manual processes, basic tools, and no formal governance. And AI is used ungoverned, right, for individual experimentation with consumer tools. That's phase one, reactive ad hoc. Phase two, standardize. Your organization establishes consistent policies and structural programs with integrated systems and basic governance. And the AI maturity includes pilot programs that have security controls and mandatory human review. Phase three, strategic. Your organization aligns activities with business objectives through data-driven decisions, advanced analytics, and comprehensive governance. And AI deployment is strategic with centers of excellence, predictive analytics, and bias detection. And finally, phase four, your organization functions as a transformational strategic partner with predictive intelligence and mature governance. And your AI systems are autonomous with self-optimizing cognitive orchestration and industry-leading ethics. Now, this is important because one of the things that we are finding is that, yes, there is a pressure and a constant discussion around incorporating AI into the organizations. So leading off of the last slide that we talked about of how we build these sustainable organizations as a result to, supporting your leaders through disruption, how can AI help you do this redesign? And where is your company? What phase are they in as it relates to AI inception? Okay, good. Half, yes, 50% is standardized. We do have a significant amount, 42%, that's being reactive. And that you just want to be mindful because that reactive stage is what will cause the ping pong and the back and forth and potentially lead to burnout. So I'm happy that we're recognizing that because we know that ultimately you want to get to where it's optimized, but it's a work in progress. And that work in progress is also what's causing the constant disruption of us being mindful of that. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right. So how can Brandon Hall, help organizations lead in a sustainable manner? We support organizations that are making this shift to create more sustainable leadership environments. And we do that through research, through benchmarking, and, implementing and sharing award-winning practices. Okay, we help leaders reframe resilience as a business capability, like we've been discussing today. We help you identify systemic stress points, right? Because it may be different in different organizations, but the stress is there because we're always dealing with constant change and disruption. And we help design leadership systems that sustain performance over time, being able to endure. So doing that is about protecting the leaders and the results, okay? So ultimately, we want to remember that, burnout isn't a sign of weak leaders. It's a signal that systems need to be redesigned, right? And having sustainable leadership, it's a strategic choice. It's all about strategy, okay? So as the disruption continues, because we know it will, the organizations that succeed, the organizations that will endure, the organizations that will survive will be the ones that protect, right? They protect and support the leadership capacity as intentional, very, very intentional with protecting and supporting the capacity of their leadership, right? And that also ultimately becomes financial capital for the company, okay? So I don't know if we have any other questions. That was our Q&A. You can add them in the chat. We're almost out of time. I'm truly appreciative and thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for the work that you do, right? And supporting your leaders under pressure. That pressure is always there. And one leader at a time, right? Which then goes into one organization at a time. We can support everyone and make sure that we do it in a sustainable way that benefits everyone, okay? So thank you so much again for your time. I'm Dr. Marline C. Duroseau, also known as Dr. Mar, Managing Director of HR and Leadership Development here in Brandon Hall. I appreciate your time.